Hello, my name is Rach, and I'm going to be talking on this podcast about thankfulness in prayer. I was asked to do this a couple of weeks ago, and if I'm honest, I didn't jump at the chance. I wasn't particularly keen on the topic, and I felt very reluctant to engage with it. And I think that was for two reasons. One reason was definitely more prevalent than the other, but both reveal more about my heart than they do anything else. The first reason was that understanding that gratitude or thankfulness is a good thing isn't unique to the Christian experience. This week of prayer coincides with the Thanksgiving holiday. The Thursday of our week of prayer is Thanksgiving. And you'll know this if you have social media, because your newsfeed is likely to be full of Pinterest graphics telling you to have an attitude of gratitude or be thankful, count your blessings, all of which are good things, but easy things to scroll past. We might also see an increase of articles telling us why gratitude is a good thing, comments on studies that have been done. The most recent study I've read up on is one done by Harvard that showed that people who were actively taking time to be grateful each day saw a decrease in their depression and anxiety and an increase in their physical health and fitness. Thankfulness is a good thing, but the world tells us that too. Society tells us that too. And so I didn't want to be another voice in that, telling you that thankfulness is a good thing or telling you that you need to be grateful, which brings me on to my second reason. I did not want to add to your to-do list. We are in a British winter, which means the nights get dark much quicker, which can feel draining and tiring. There's also significant demands on us from within our inner circles and in our lives, but within the world as well. We have demands from our family, from our relationships and friendships, from our work, from our school, from our studying. But there's also demands from the world telling us what to care about and what to engage with. Life can feel really exhausting, and I didn't relish the idea of telling you to do something else, of adding to your to-do list, of telling you, even if it's good for you, that you need to do this thing. But actually, luckily, God challenged me, and he reminded me of my favourite story in the Bible, or one of my favourite stories, I should say. The reason this story and this particular part of the story, which we're going to hone in on, is my favourite, is because it reveals so much of the human condition and of human nature, but it also shows what God's solution for that is. So today we're going to look at this story together. We'll look at what it tells us about human nature and the human condition in terms of thankfulness, and also what it reveals as God's solution before applying this to thankfulness in prayer. So we're going to spend some time in Exodus, and we're actually going to look at the Exodus story, which is the story of God's people being freed from slavery. I'm not going to read it all because it's actually about 12 chapters worth of the Bible, but I would encourage you, despite not wanting to tell you what to do, if you could find time to read the story, I'd actively encourage you to do it. It is an amazing story, and so it reveals so much of God. So I will summarise the story briefly for us, and then we'll hone in on two particular sections. So the people of God, who are referred to as the Israelites, are enslaved by Egypt. They are working long, hard hours, doing lots of painful labour in order to build Egypt into a great nation. God doesn't like this, because God's design for his people, which we know because we live in the good of it now, is for them to be free. God's design for his people is for them to work in a way that allows them to flourish while glorifying him and to enjoy that work. This isn't what's happening in Egypt. So God raises up Moses and Aaron, and he commissions them to approach Pharaoh and say, "Let the people of God go." Moses and Aaron do this. Pharaoh says no. Pharaoh says, "Who is even this God you talk of? He's not as powerful as the gods I worship." God says to Moses and Aaron, "Tell him if he does not let the people of God go, a plague will befall the people of Egypt." They say this. Pharaoh says, "Carry on. I'm not releasing the people of God." And so God sends the first plague, which is him turning the water to blood. This process, this conversation repeats 10 separate times. Each time God sends a different plague. Lots of scholars believe that the plagues each disproved a different Egyptian god or a different god that they would have worshipped. So it was actually an act of God displaying his might and his power. and saying, I am the Most High God. The final plague, which we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at, is the death of the firstborn. God says to Moses, tell Pharaoh that if he does not let the people of God go tonight, each firstborn son of the family and the livestock will be killed. Pharaoh still does not relent and says, I will not let the people of God go. So that night, God gives his people some instructions. He says to the Israelites, sacrifice a lamb and spread the blood of the lamb across your doorposts. When I see the blood of the lamb, I will know not to come in and kill your firstborn. Cook the lamb, roast the lamb, and eat it with some unleavened bread, which is just bread that doesn't rise, so like modern day pitta, and bitter herbs. Burn the meat that's left over, do not save it till morning, and eat with your belts tied around you, your staff in your hand, and your sandals on. God's preparing them for a speedy exit. So the people of God do this, and sure enough, the Spirit of God passes over the houses with the blood on, but with the lamb's blood on. But the firstborn sons of each of the Egyptians are killed because they had not followed or heeded these instructions. This is what causes Pharaoh to relent. He says, fine, God's people can go. So the Israelites, ready because God's prepared them, get up and leave. And God guides them with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. He guides them to take them out of Egypt, and then they reach the Red Sea. And the people panic for a brief second, thinking, what on earth are we going to do now? But God parts the Red Sea and the people can pass through. He brings them into the wilderness. There's an amazing story of him providing them with water when they were thirsty. God has shown his power to the people of Israel significantly. He's displayed his power and might through plagues, through proving that he's the Most High God. He's displayed his power and might through the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, and through parting the Red Sea and providing them with water. But most importantly, his displays of power and might are actually displays of zeal and compassion for his people. God has acted out of love for the people of Israel here. He wanted them to live in the way that he designed them to. So out of his zeal and compassion, he showed his power and might, knowing that that's what Pharaoh would bow to. He showed his power and might with zeal and compassion when he gave them the instructions of being ready to leave in the night. God has consistently revealed his zeal, compassion, and love for his people in mighty acts of power. And this brings us to what is my favourite part of this whole story. And I'm just going to again read this. This is from Exodus 16. So the people of God set out from Elim, and the congregation of Israel came to the wilderness. On the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from Egypt, the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled, saying, God has brought us out here to die. We should have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, because at least we sat with the pots of meat and bread to the full. We've been brought out here to die and starve. I love this part of the story because I can relate with the people of God who are moaning. And the reason I can relate with them is because I do what they are doing in this part of the story all the time, which is allow my need or allow my lack to shape my view of God. Allowing what I want from him to shape him, or the fact that I haven't got what I want from him to shape my view of him. I love that the writer has put in here when it happened, the second month, the 15th day of the second month. So realistically, a month and a half roughly after they left Egypt, they're hungry and they moan. And I don't know, I've got nothing to back this up, but I wonder if the writer put that in there because he wanted to show how quickly God's people had forgotten his provision, how quickly God's people had forgotten his zeal and his compassion and his acts of power for them. This part of the Bible, my favourite, or one of my favourite parts of the Bible, reveals the human condition to be one that forgets God's goodness quickly. It reveals that human nature means we don't remember who God says he is or the things he's done for us easily. As humans, we allow our need and our want to shape God, to shape our view of him. And so we moan and we grumble. It's exactly what the Israelites are doing here. And I wonder, had they taken a moment to think, oh, I'm living in freedom, I'm no longer enslaved to Egypt. Isn't God good? Or, wow, remember when God showed that he was the Most High God with all of the plagues, and then led us out of Egypt with a pillar of cloud and fire, and parted the Red Sea and provided us with water, I wonder if they would have still moaned. This definitely reveals to me, at least, my human nature, my human failings, which are to forget the goodness of God. But I love this story so much because earlier on in the story, God provides the solution. God knew what human nature was before the Israelites had even moaned. He knew what the human condition was because he knows us. And so actually, if we go back to Exodus 12, we can see the solution that God provides. He's just given them instructions on the fact that they need to roast this lamb and burn the leftovers and wear their belts and their staffs and their sandals and be ready to leave with their unleavened bread. And then he says this in Exodus 12:14, "This day shall be for you a memorial day. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast." And then he provides instructions with what that day, that festival, that memorial day needs to look like for the people of Egypt in the years to come, people of Israel, in the years to come. You will keep this day as a memorial. We know that Jesus celebrated the Passover. We know that many Jews today still celebrate the Passover. God's solution to the human condition of forgetting his goodness was to command his people to remember his goodness, but to do so by marking their calendars, by setting aside a day, by creating a ritual or a routine to remember who he is and what he did for them. And to do it with a feast, which I think is a very kind thing from God. So the human condition is we forget the goodness of God quickly. God's solution is to say to us, mark your calendars, have a routine, ritualistically remember my goodness. We see examples of this throughout Scripture actually as well. There's times where the Israelites win battles that they shouldn't have won, but God intervened and helped them to win. So God commands them to build an altar so that anyone who passes by that place remembers the goodness of God and what was done on that day. There's other festivals God asks them to commemorate and keep. Other things he asks them to do in his law. God knew that remembering the goodness of God, remembering his kindness to them, his provision for them, would be a good and helpful thing. And actually, if we look at what we spoke about earlier in terms of these studies from Harvard, the information that tells us that thankfulness is good for us spiritually, emotionally, and physically, that would just make sense in terms of who God is. It would make sense that the Creator God made his people to benefit physically, emotionally, and spiritually from remembering his goodness. Yes, knowing thankfulness is a good thing is not unique to the Christian experience, but knowing that we were designed so that thankfulness would benefit us is unique to the Christian experience. Such a kindness from God. So if we've looked at the human condition, we've looked at God's solution, how does this practically help us? How do we practically remember the goodness of God? And how does that aid thankfulness in prayer? Well, actually, we've already touched on the first reason, which is that thankfulness and remembering God's goodness, which are the same thing if we follow Jesus. Everything we have is from him. So if we're being thankful for what's in front of us or around us or for situations that have happened, we're remembering the goodness of God because everything comes from him. The first reason that being thankful is good and can aid our prayer is because it makes us feel better. It increases our health and fitness, as Harvard tell us, but it helps us to feel better. The second reason is that thankfulness fuels our prayer, fuels our faith, it builds our faith, because if we remember what God's done for us, we remember who God is. As I quoted earlier, the Israelites and me, and maybe you, listener, allow our need to shape God, allow our lack to shape God. This is not a good thing because it means that we don't pray in faith. It means that we grumble and we moan. However, if we allow our testimony if we allow the things that we've seen God do before, the things that God says he is, to shape our view of him, then we have more faith for him to move. I can pray for bigger things as a result of what I've seen God do in my life. I can pray for bigger prayers. I genuinely believe that if the Israelites had remembered the goodness of God, they wouldn't have doubted that they had been brought out there to die. They would have thought, if he's provided for us so far, if he cares about us this deeply, if this is his zeal and compassion for us, then we won't go without food. It would have equipped them to pray bigger prayers. Thankfulness in prayer is crucial for us because it lifts our gaze to the one we're praying to. It reminds us of who we're praying to. And it helps us then to pray bigger prayers, better prayers even. If we know we're praying to a provider, we ask for more provision. If we know we're praying to a grace giver, we ask for more grace. If we know we're praying to a healer, we ask for more healings. Our lived experience, our testimony, is a weapon in prayer. It's a foundation as well. We live in a world that is saturated with bad news at the moment. There's another study that I read recently that shows that on average, the average adult is sleeping 1 to 2 hours less a night than what the average adult slept 10 to 15 years ago. And for the average teenager, it's up to 4 hours less a night than what they were sleeping 10 years ago. The scientists doing this study found a direct correlation between the lack of sleep and the advance of social media. Because 10 to 15 years ago, if you wanted to hear about what was going on in the world, you flicked on your TV at the time that the news was on and you could turn it off when you wanted to. Or you'd go to the shop and buy a newspaper. You had to actively engage in the news to find out what was going on in the world. Now you can open your Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever else app, and within 30 seconds you can see one of your friends' manicures, one of your friends' dogs doing a trick, their cabinet reshuffle in the government, and then the conflict in Gaza within 30 seconds. And we're expected to process that. We have access to news and world events without even our consent, really, and far quicker and far more intensely than we ever have done before. And it's impacting us negatively. Less sleep a night than what the average adult was getting 10 or 15 years ago is no joke. We know God values rest. It says in his word that he gives us rest. I would argue that it is more important now to be actively and ritualistically finding time to thank God and to remember God, and to be thinking about what does that look like for you in your current rhythm of life? What does it look like for you to routinely take time to remember God's goodness and to be thankful? Does it look like making a list every night? That's something I'm doing at the moment because God told me to a few months ago, and it's really helped me. Every night before I go to sleep, I make a list either in my head, on my phone, or on my Instagram stories of things I'm thankful for that day. And I'm sleeping better and for longer hours because I'm going tonight remembering how God's blessed me, going to sleep that night remembering how God's blessed me. Some days it's things that I've seen happen at work that are breakthroughs and gifts someone's given me or nice words someone said to me that I'm thankful for. Other days it's really hard to find things I'm thankful for. Other days my mood doesn't allow me to do it easily, but I look around the room that I'm in and I thank God for my bed. I thank God for the roof over my head, the access to heating. I thank God for my clothes. And it lifts my gaze. It opens my view of God. Does it look like for you taking half an hour a week to just sit and thank God or write down everything you can think of that you're grateful for? Maybe it's once a month. Maybe you take an afternoon a month to just thank God, or take yourself away to remember him. As a church, Verena's led us in it for this week. This week is a time in our calendar to remember God. But we need to remember God's goodness. We need to be thankful in prayer, because we're quick to forget. God's given us a solution. It makes us feel better, and it builds our faith. This is why we're thankful in prayer. This is why we remember the goodness of God. And my encouragement to you today would be to make time to do that. And not just today, but from now and for the next year, maybe the next 2 years. What are you going to do, and how often are you going to remember the goodness of God? Are you going to remember his kindness and his provision?